Brett Sockold here, helping you make every class Catholic. So today I'm in Bismarck, North Dakota, and it was interesting because it was a return trip. I've worked with the teachers here at Light of Christ in Bismarck a few months ago, and so one of the things they asked me to do on a return trip was let's actually walk through building a lesson plan kind of from scratch. And they gave me an assignment. One lesson plan, they wanted to do place values with the pre-K to 5. And then with 6 through 12, they wanted to do evolution. So that was part one. And then we worked on, they brought their own lessons and we worked on their topics of choice. But in the first hour, we worked on evolution. And I just wanted to share two quick things that emerged in that conversation that I thought were really interesting. One was there's a question I ask when you're starting to consider a topic. And it's, what does this topic tell us about God and God's relationship with creation? So, what does evolution tell us about God and God's relationship with creation? And someone at the back of the room put up their hand and said, well, it says something about God's respect for human freedom, right? That God does not coerce God's creation, but God creates and then defers to secondary causality, which includes human freedom, but not only human freedom, right? All the chance events that happen in the course of not only of evolution, but even human relations, right? You are a product of chance. Your parents may or may not have met, depending on a whole range of variables that could have gone a bunch of different ways and all that kind of stuff, right? So, so the question is, well, so can God's will be done if he's able to leave things to chance, including leaving things to human freedom? And that allows us to see something really important, which is that God is not one more cause that is in competition with other causes, but can transcend those causes and therefore can allow them genuine freedom and still affect his will through them. Now, if that sounds impossible, consider the fact that casinos do it all the time, right? Casinos don't need to load the dice in order to ensure that the house is going to take in more than it gives out at the end of an average day, right? In fact, probably almost every day a casino is going to take in more than it pays out without rigging anything by messing with chance, right? You don't need to load the dice to do that. You just need to put genuine randomness within a context that's going to lead to certain kinds of predictable outcomes. So humans can do this in casinos, and we do it in lots of other contexts too. Well, certainly if humans can do it, God can do it. And so evolution tells us about a God who is transcendent with respect to creation, that can allow it its own proper causality and can allow humans to be genuinely free without interfering with God's purpose. And in fact, there was a crucifix on the wall in the room we were working within. And we said, look, God did not need to coerce Peter or Judas or Pilate to end up in that situation. In fact, quite the opposite. It was God granting Peter and Judas and Pilate and everyone else involved in that story the freedom to do what they did that ended him up on that cross. But the cross also shows that even though the results of human freedom are the crucifixion, that's not the end of the story for God. That doesn't ruin God's plan. God works even with that. Well, if killing God doesn't wreck God's plan, then certainly evolution isn't going to wreck God's plan, right? Sometimes you hear these funny ideas like, oh, well, Judas can't really be guilty because God needed Judas to betray him in order to save us. That's wrong. God did not need Judas to betray him. But God can work with even betrayal. That's the right picture of the Christian God. So that's one idea. Second one that came up, as we were working towards the end, we were getting the real nuts and bolts of a lesson plan. And I want to share just one that I found very helpful. And it's objectives, right? Very often teachers will put objectives in their lesson plan. And one teacher suggested that a very appropriate lesson for an objective on evolution is that you are able to distinguish between science questions and not science questions, and science answers that are properly responses to science questions, and other kinds of answers which are answers to different kinds of questions. Because in evolution, we get this really messed up, right? We end up with philosophies that think evolution means, your life is meaningless because you're just a collision of atoms in space, or God doesn't exist. Or these are all philosophical conclusions that some people imagine follow from scientific data. But noticing that that's a very different kind of question, and that the scientific data about evolution does not answer the question about God's existence or about the meaning and purpose of your life or anything else like that, right? And so we looked at even what are our needs as a human community in the next pandemic? Well, developing good vaccines is one kind of a thing that I hope we have the scientific skill for. And I think, there's good evidence we do. We were pretty quick on the draw there. But what were we not great at? Having healthy public discussions that distinguished between properly scientific questions and other kinds of questions that are value questions, public policy questions. And when someone says, follow the science on a public policy question, that's actually a category mistake, right? Public policy question should be responsible to the best science we have, but it also has to weigh it against all kinds of other considerations, right? Science may say this practice is likely to lead to these kinds of outcomes, but then you say, yes, but not doing that will lead to other outcomes, and on balance, which ones do we prefer? That's a values question and a policy question that is informed by science, but it's not a science question. And if we can learn to distinguish those kinds of questions when we study evolution, precisely because it ends up raising philosophical and religious questions because of its relationship to how we think about creation and where we come from, and it tempts us to make mistakes on that front, getting clarity on it when we deal with the doctrine of evolution in school is also good preparation for things like having a healthy discussion about public policy when it's time for a pandemic. So those were two really key ideas that I thought were fun. It was a very rich discussion. We could go on for a long time talking about evolution. In fact, we did an hour, and I wished we had 2 or 3 hours. But here in just a few minutes for us are two outcomes that I found really valuable. So I hope they're helpful for you. God bless.